Welcome to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. Problem solvers have problems too. So here at Behind the Podium, I, Jared Cohen, and my co-host Alexander Ellis discuss the struggles, philosophies, demands, and practices of the coach, or said more broadly, health and wellness practitioner. To provide quality coaching is to enhance someone's life in an everlasting and unfolding way. This is not easy and requires a lot of due diligence and self-mastery on the part of the coach to be able to perform. So without further ado, join us as we dig deeper into the depths of the coach's mind. Behind the Podium, back in action, talking about all things coaching, living that coach lifestyle, receiving coaching, giving coaching. What are the philosophies, practices, and struggles that we all face, whether we're in that hot seat or not? I am Jared Cohen.
And I'm Alexander Ellis.
And welcome to another episode. Or welcome back or welcome to, depending on your familiarity.
How long you've been with us.
We got a really great topic to talk about today, which is the topic of titles/brands, and really thinking about what you're communicating with the way in which you identify and how that identification makes sense to you as well as the audience. And that can be whether it's the audience you're specifically trying to reach or just generally, you're at a party and someone asks, what do you do? How do you describe that quote unquote hat that, you're wearing, when you show up for work? So a lot of things we can get after here. I think we will definitely just touch the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, and I'm excited to actually get a little bit more clarification just by having this discussion.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is something that comes up with a lot of professionals, because this day and age, we might not be working just one job. And so it's like, well, how do I encompass all that I do into one descriptor about what it is that I do? And even, if you do have a single full-time job with a title, what does that title actually mean? So I'm stoked to talk about this. And I think it would be really great if we start talking about our own titles and branding that we've cooked up and developed. So Jared, why don't you tell us a little bit more about CPB growth?
All right, totally. So CPB growth stands for cultivating, practicing barrierlessness. And the growth I tagged on there as to emphasize my interest in helping people to adopt or maintain that growth mindset with everything they're doing. So taking that back a step, barrierlessness is a term coined by Joshua Waitzkin. Those of you that are probably familiar, or that are familiar with our podcast, are probably familiar with Tim Ferriss's. And I was introduced to Josh Waitzkin and Josh Waitzkin's work through Tim Ferriss. Josh Waitzkin was or is thought of primarily in terms of being the childhood chess prodigy that the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer was based off of. And anyway, he then went later on in life to become a high-level martial artist in competitive Tai Chi as well as Jiu-Jitsu. And through his journey of mastering and learning these different but yet potentially similar disciplines, he wrote this book called The Art of Learning. And in that, barrierlessness is how he refers to breaking down the barriers between seemingly disparate pursuits, so all moments become enriched by a sense of interconnectedness. And for me, and those of you, if you've been listening to our podcast in order, you will know of our episode with Elizabeth Whiff, in which we talked about finding your why. And for me, so much of my why has to do with this experience of helping others connect the dots. And that's just like what I get most excited about. It's what I'm excited about as a coach, as well as in my personal and professional life. And so when I read Josh Waitzkin's book, that term barrierlessness, just like it was literally the word that was capturing kind of this concept of connecting the dots, and something that I had become very passionate about and continue to go back to in terms of skill acquisition and just wanting to become more adaptable and transferable. And then cultivating and practicing was my way of thinking about, well, I can't practice something unless I've begun to plant the seed, so to speak. So cultivating is what I consider that first step in the process. And then now that I've cultivated it, I need to practice it. And the two go back and forth in a way in which that it's always happening, and I gotta keep on it. And so long story short, CPB growth, that became something that I felt like captured the diversity of where I'm at and where I want to be going. And I think what's interesting for me is that it still exists, even somewhat ambiguous or completely undefined, or not completely defined to me at this point in time, as I'm still trying to figure out where I want to be and how I want to brand myself, especially as I'm going through all this sports psychology education and, kind of trying to learn and practice these mental coaching skills while still having the movement coaching on one end, and wanting to know what's the best way to weave those together. So
yeah,
that's
and actually I was going to add, as you were talking about it, that level, as far as branding goes, having a brand like CPB Growth that isn't specific to it's not CPB Growth weightlifting or
Right.
whatever that is, that you are then able to do many different things under the umbrella of a brand.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. And I'm glad you said that, because that's what I'm going for.
You did it.
I did it. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the thing, and it's hard for me at times because like it makes so much sense to me internally and like at a gut level, but then describing that to others is really difficult. And because, I think just generally for anybody, we have difficulty with gray area, and I've always thought before, this is like pretty tangential, but on the same sort of vein here, it's like I feel like being bisexual is probably much more difficult for someone than either identifying as completely gay or straight. And again, it just sort of exists within that element of society and social psychology in which it's just hard for people to understand, like, you being in the middle somehow, or that you don't completely identify at one end, and I think this is what we experience as yoga tune-up teachers as well, and identifying with that terminology where it's like, wait, you said yoga?
But you're not a yoga
Yeah,
teacher.
but you're not, and then, and so it definitely strikes this interesting chord where I think it does us better as like the practitioner to feel good about like what we're identifying with, because we don't want to be stuck in a lane,
Yeah.
but yet it makes it we were unknowingly or knowingly presenting a challenge for ourselves to have to make sense of for others, and just have to kind of embrace that full on, and not be frustrated by it.
Yeah. Well, and you already mentioned this, but if you're just hopping on with this episode, I really recommend that you go back and listen to our episode with Elizabeth Whip and Uncovering Your Why, because that process will help with titles. Because people have, like you've said, their own idea of what a title means. And the minute you say, oh, I'm a yoga teacher, or I'm a CrossFit coach, or I'm a this or a that, they're already layering their own understanding and experiences of what that means for them onto what it is that you do. And so being able to describe what you do with maybe, and maybe not giving it a title might be better. So I've been, and it takes a long time to come to that final point of, oh, what is it that you do? And then having your quick return. And so the current one that I'm working with, when people ask, oh, what do you do? I used to say yoga teacher, but then they're like, oh, you're a yoga teacher. It's so LA, I feel like.
Yeah,
But,
it's funny because I was talking to my mom last night. Hey, mom. And she asked, like, so what does Alex do? Like, and then I just found myself also kind of like, well, did you listen to the self-care startup episode? Because she puts out these products and like blah blah blah. So anyway, go on.
I just remember I was visiting family in Joplin, Missouri, which is like as middle of the country as you can get. And my cousin's wife's brother-in-law, something like that. So it wasn't somebody I was directly related to, but this is a guy who, at 17, he started working, and he's been at that same job since then. And, he's now at a manager level at 26. And so when he asked me what I did, I was like, oh, well, I teach yoga. And he was like, no, but like, really, what do you do for work? I'm like, no, really, like, I teach yoga. But so he already had an idea of that. But so the elevator speech or elevator pitch, or even that title has other ideas. What I say is that I teach people how to maximize their mobility to live pain-free in their bodies, whatever that means for them. And that currently is even just one umbrella of what it is that I do, because it's the movement piece.
Right.
And the even cooler thing is that I can do that in person, but then also on the internet through my self-care guides and things like that. And not putting down yoga or anything. It's just like what I'm teaching now kind of moves beyond what traditional asana is. I don't teach the same 24 or 36 or even 48 postures. We're breaking stuff down and building it back up to really, truly maximize the benefit and effect for the person practicing it, whether, again, they're in front of me or not. So that's how you can tell your mom. Hi, Jared's mom. This is what I do.
Yeah, there you go. That was perfect, because now I can just be like, because I know she'll ask again. Sorry.
But
now it's like, hey, episode number,
episode.
And go to time slot 11 minutes.
I was thinking about, after our conversation with Elizabeth, and going a little bit deeper, because that explanation of I teach people to maximize their mobility to live pain-free in their bodies is a what of the actual process of what I do. And the underlying operating system for me is really to break down seemingly complicated concepts so that people can use them in a more applicable way for them. And, this weekend I met up with a friend who wanted to know more about podcasting.
Yeah.
So I was able to distill what I've learned from our, trial and be able to say, hey, do this, don't do that. Trust me, I've been down that road. And so, who knows, 5 years from now, I'll still be breaking down concepts, but whether it will be about the body or branding or social media or web, who knows, but that's always there. So that's where, titles, I guess what I want to say is that titles are not permanent. You can always change it.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, and I think that's really cool what you just said. And I would totally piggyback on kind of what it sounds like a new epiphany that you're stumbling on for yourself, which is your kind of future of really being this teacher and a coach in a much more general sense, and like, you were just saying before we recorded, like, hey, I'm going to learn how to, do calligraphy, right? Or some variation of that. And it's like, that's so awesome because, yeah, that is your personality, this total
Yeah.
zeal for learning and wanting to. And I think you've gotten to this point both as, a learner and a coach and teacher yourself, is like, you have a better understanding of the best practices and
Mhm.
paths to take in order to get the information you need. And what I think is most difficult that you've more so mastered is weeding through the mess of stuff that would otherwise bog someone down or totally leave them giving up before much progress was made.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really cool for you to be able to so imminently kind of now act on, like, hey, here's a new skill, and let me give you kind of my take on it. And it
Yeah.
made me think of Sean Croxton,
Hmm.
who is like total OG of the podcasting world.
Yeah.
2007, 8, I want to say. I mean, he was interviewing Rob Wolf on paleo before his book even came out.
Wow.
And it's I don't really listen to him much anymore. I still get some of the emails, but I'm very interested in how, similar to you, he's really adapted his approach. That most of the time, or most of his history as a podcaster, was really within the nutrition sphere, and tackling so much of the paleo movement and gluten and gut health and functional medicine. And now I think in the past 2 years, he's really kind of said to his followers, like, look, like I'm more interested in this entrepreneurial growth and personal development, and you're going to see that shift now in my work. I hope you'll come along. For me, like I'm kind of I'm a little burned out on all the food stuff, and but I think what's cool about it is that really his why was never about food. It was about
Hmm.
helping share information to the masses, like really quality information from the experts themselves that really didn't exist in any capacity before he started. And to be the trailblazer there, and then to say, okay, like I'm going to still follow this why and this fulfillment, but I'm going to do it in,
A
with
different
a
way.
different way, different, essentially the context is still there, but the content is changing. And I think, back to your point that it's less about the what, it's more about the why, and therefore,
Hmm.
the what being the content, we get a little caught up in that, and hence why, going back to CPB growth, I was purposely trying not to tag on fitness or
Right.
um, some of the other things that can too easily become um, blockaded in one area, and rather thinking about, okay, like I'm interested in movement, I'm interested in psychology, I'm interested in learning. Okay, so here's my sort of synthesis of these three pillars, and you're all along
Totally.
for the ride.
Yeah, no, there's no rules.
Yeah.
You know, my first blog was actually Holla for some mala,
Yeah.
which is still some of the handles I use on social media because I just love it. And I think I started that website in maybe like 2012 or 11. But I remember I was watching like a YouTube video, and it was around the time where those videos where it'd be like, stuff yogis say or stuff moms say or whatever. And it was the yogis one, and the girl had her mala beads and was like, holla for some mala. And I was like dying of laughter. And so I looked it up and nobody had trademarked it. So I was like, great. So I bought the URL, which in this day and age is basically almost like getting the trademark.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny.
And I started blogging there. And then I realized that it's really hard to spell. You know, it's like, well, it's 2 L's in Hala and 1 L in Mala. And so as far as like a branding standpoint, it needed to grow. And so that's where AE Wellness grew out of, because I was also, you know, in the process of trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And, you know, did I want to just be in the yoga realm because mala beads are kind of, you know, in that realm, or did I want to expand beyond it? Did I also want to have, similar to you, a brand that could grow regardless of which direction I went? And so that's how I came up with AE Wellness, because wellness could be anything, you know?
Right.
And so I really love just, you know, teaching people all kinds of things, whether it's social media or, you know, whatever. And so the wellness could be wellness of your business, wellness of your brand, wellness of your body or mind, whatever. And that more general brand or title has served me really well over the last, say, 18 months or so. It's way easier to spell. And yet I was giving somebody my email and they were like, what does AE Wellness stand for? And I was like, Alexandra Ellis. And I had just given them my name. They were like, oh. So I was like, nobody's ever going to figure out, you know, whether it's Hala for Samala or Alexandra Ellis Wellness, there will always be questions.
You know, I'm really glad you brought up the Hala for Samala, because I think this was another point I wanted to talk about, which is I think when you do stuff like that, what's cool to me is a little bit of the secret society you invite with a title or a brand that has a little bit of like a niche association to it. You know, and we talked about this offline one time, is like, I love wearing kind of somewhat fringe type of t-shirts.
Right.
The other one
He's currently wearing tie-dye, I might add.
Yeah, this is actually a Grateful Dead shirt. But what's cool about it is that, you know, it doesn't just like blatantly say Grateful Dead. I mean, it's got the tie-dye, which sort of says it there. But on the back, it's got 2 lines of one of the songs. So, like, to me, that sort of invites the most true user. You know, it's like,
gotta be in the club.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Grateful Dead with you unless, you know, you're like, oh yeah, new Speedway Boogie. And then the other one I was thinking about that I didn't mention last time to you was I recently bought I went to Comic-Con and I bought a Star Labs t-shirt. And for those of you who don't know, Star Labs is where Barry Allen, who's the Flash, works out of, and all of his team. They fight crime. That's like their headquarters, Star Labs.
So basically, we're just 2 huge nerds.
Yeah, pop culture. But anyway, back to this point. You know, Hala for Samala. For those that like, you know, are you know, part of that closer knit yoga community, have seen that video. Like, all of a sudden, you get immediate buy-in from them. You know, like, they're interested, and they're like, for me, I'd be someone, if I knew what that was, like, I would be so perked up about like the fact that now, like, it's a conversation starter. Like, oh, you saw that video too? Like, oh my God, this like tells me a little something about your personality. And so back to CPP growth is that, you know, my website purposely puts you on the homepage where I like sort of describe my why and my mission statement in more long form, and then spell out this term barrierlessness. So for me, it's kind of like, hey, if you also are a fan of Josh Waitskin and connected with this word, then I know, like, I'm excited to work with you because like we're playing from that same headspace, and we can geek out on all this stuff. And I think that's another potentially missing link for certain brands and titles that people don't don't utilize. And I actually just came to mind. I think Kelly Starrett is a great example. Becoming a supple leopard,
Mhm. Oh
um,
yeah.
like everyone's got books out there on athleticism and movement, fitness, mobility, but like becoming a supple leopard, he really,
It's for his in crowd.
yeah, for his in crowd, and like that I have one of the leopard shirts,
Yep.
it's like, this is cool, like this is such a big thing we forget, that symbolism aspect, like we're tribal, and
Hmm.
for a lot of us, I think we get more excited the closer knit that tribe is, and this is where I think CrossFit, in a sense, to me, like is totally meaningless, because like that's so big now and it means so many different things to different people, and this is me talking in 2016, and back when I first got my level 1 in 2011, I still felt like I didn't really want to use that title because I could intuitively sense how the way I digested and related to CrossFit was very different than the masses, and so therefore it kind of leaves you a little bit cautious about how what does your title mean to those that you're giving it to, and how are they
Hmm.
filtering it before you've even had a chance to um,
Explain it.
explain it, or kind of what's the word, uh, damage control it, in a sense,
Yeah.
is kind of what I was thinking, like
Yeah. Well,
you
because
know
CrossFit too has grown so big that people have their preconceived ideas,
yeah,
similar to
and
yoga.
it becomes so dichotomous, yeah,
Yeah.
very similar to yoga, where it's either like I love that thing, or I have very
Doesn't everybody get injured?
yeah, totally. And so and that's where I was thinking about in terms of the damage control, and
Yeah.
sometimes I've always kind of gone more bland with strength and conditioning, where it's
Hmm.
like nobody has anything, it's like, oh, okay. Like there's, for good or for bad, there's not the same amount of like emotional reaction to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing that has been talked about, branding in terms of nutrition, right? This paleo thing. On one end, like I think
Hmm.
that there's so much good has happened for that word, and I think I'm really happy to see it become more neutralized now. Where menus to just sort of give people that like kind of handle to hold on to on a menu, like to be like, oh, this is the paleo option, like I feel safe here,
Right.
versus I think more 3 years ago it was kind of like people would get very heated about like what that meant, and
Are you allowed to eat rice?
yeah, I mean even still it's like, oh, caveman, but I think that's the sort of the fine line you walk, when you're gonna establish yourself with an identity that is much bigger than yourself.
Yeah. And I think it really is important to understand before you try to figure out who you're trying to help or who you're trying to work with in that niche is the operating system and why you
Mm.
actually do what you do and what that underlying theme is running through everything. Because I mean, having a niche is incredibly important. It is much easier to be everything to one group of people than to be everything to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are scattered, as far as branding all over the place with who you're trying to talk to, you miss a lot of people. And actually, I just had a student come back to class. She had been away for, gosh, it's probably been 6 or 7 months at this point. And she's like, oh, well, I still see you on social media. I still get your emails. It's like every email is written to me. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what you want. You want every person you talk to feel like you're speaking just to them. And so, really understanding and being clear about who that one person is will then allow you to also speak to other people. So, I'm just trying to think of an example like Marie Forleo. She speaks to I know she has in her mind a very specific person, down to the type of magazine this person likes to read, how old they are, what kind of clothes, what car do they drive, what do they do for hobbies, all of these things. And yet she appeals to many other people. But she's not trying to be everybody's best friend. She's clear about what she wants to do, and then other people are attracted to that for different reasons. And so as coaches, I think we sometimes want to be the superhero for so many different clients, but being very clear about who you want to work with. Like you're saying, if you know about, Josh, is it Josh Waitskin? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, Waitskin.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast too. It was fascinating. If you know about Josh Waitskin, you know about barrierlessness, like, I want to work with you. And there'll be other people attracted to that, and they'll be just as cool, but they may not have been the person you originally had in mind. But you can tell, too, with branding when you see if it feels a little bit scattered and inauthentic, and just like, you can tell when people aren't clear about who they want to attract.
Yeah. And even I think for some people it's that clarity, it manifests differently, right? Like for some of us, it's cerebrally very clear, and we're sort of analyzing it. In others, it just doesn't feel right,
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is totally true, and it's true in a very paradoxical sense. It's this weird thing where it's like you can be everyone, you can be everything to sort of a smaller group of people. You can't be everything to everyone. And yet, even inside that, what's really interesting is like this paradox of you have sort of the vision of who you're talking to, and yet the more clear you are with that, the more people you'll actually get to conglomerate
and attract.
Yeah, to attract and then conglomerate around your kind of ideas and thoughts and philosophies, and I think that's really a reflection of you just continuing to be very authentic, and in some ways, right? The beauty of authenticity is that it goes back to the context, right? It's like people are attracted to that very gut sense of trusting who you are, regardless of the actual thing that you're talking about. And then that's what becomes so exciting, because now, like, I want to check this out because that person referred it, right? I don't know what that is, but like, I know I have a connection with them. And so it just makes sense to follow those breadcrumbs. And like, a couple examples come to mind, but one that we both have experience with is Gil Headley, where the Somonaut, cadaver dissection lab man. But I bring him up because, for me, it's like I had a connection with Jill Miller. And so like, it didn't really even matter who Gil Headley was. It was just like, if Jill said this guy was cool, like, I wanted to go check him out,
Right.
And I remember mentioning that to a friend of mine. He was like, yeah, I've noticed, like, it's really cool what you do. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you essentially, like, you take the footnotes of those that you look up to and you're inspired by, and then you sort of like create your own path with those collection of footnotes. And I was like, wow, that's like a great, like, that is so true, and sort of like, okay, so Jill was Gil. And then, like, how did I find Jill? I found Jill from Kelly Starrett, and it's like, so like now it's like, oh my God, this is so cool. This web really expands. And I think coming back to, what we've talked about before in terms of what does it mean to be coachable, and that aspect of really being open to what you don't know, so you can invite that collaboration, and then therefore the ease of overlap of brands. And really what it comes down to is the overlap of missions. It's like, it's not about brands anymore. It's like, hey, we're in this fight together. We're interested in this deeper thing. And now, like, we can all mingle.
Yeah, totally. Um, and I think I just lost my train of thought. I think, wait, I don't know what I think, but I think it kind of goes with the point I now have realized I want to make. Don't be afraid to change.
Mm,
You know, that there's always this growth process that's happening. And, you know, for you too, you're studying with Kelly and then you study with Gil and
yeah.
then, you know, and Jill and, you know, who you were even 2 months ago is different than where you are today and right now. And so almost like, you know, being general with the branding and then the title can be more specific, but don't be afraid to make changes and adjust things, and it's fine. You know, you printed out business cards, whatever, just print
Right.
some more.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's okay. It's totally okay.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point. And I especially like, you could argue like nowadays more than ever, right? It's like, um, it's easier to make that shift in branding, with the various platforms that you can quickly edit, right? Whether it's Facebook
Mm.
or Instagram. So, if anything, remind yourself of that to limit some of the internal resistance regarding, like, oh, well, I already, kind of have this thing that people associate with. Um, and, like back to your point about reaching such a variety of people, but still kind of like as the driver of that, still speaking to sort of one person, which is like really your, I guess, like inner child. It's like you're just like speaking to like all the things that you're interested in, and you want to play with all these toys in the same room. You don't want to have to feel like you can only play with this action figure.
Right.
And I think Tim Ferriss is another great example of this, where I like, for me, it's like, wow, this is like a one-stop shop. I get all the stuff I'm interested in regarding to like fitness and movement. I get sort of the entrepreneurial and business side of things. I get the creative narrative. He's also like a man after my own heart in terms of East Asian studies, particularly Japan and Japanese. And it's like, it's just
Yeah.
weird. You don't know. Uh, it's like you don't know how many connections there may be with people, and hence why it's important to really show those colors, and I think find more ways to connect the dots. To help people see how all of these seemingly disparate interests or disciplines can be so interconnected, and we can all kind of enjoy that so much more, as opposed to being too beholden to a particular genre, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah. And being though, like when I do any social media posts or I'm writing my newsletters, like I've done work to be very specific about the person I'm talking to, you know,
Yeah,
and so everything I do, it's like I'm having a conversation with her. 'Cause my model, or I don't know what you would call it, but avatar maybe,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
is a woman, you
Right.
know,
Yeah,
and but it's just like really honing in and being specific about what it is that you're actually trying to achieve and who you want to do that with. And then from there, you can be more authentic with
right.
whatever it is that you do.
Yeah, and I think to that point as well, knowing that you're not everything you put out shouldn't land for everyone.
No.
And I think it's cooler that I think it's cooler, and it's more resonating if it doesn't. That's kind of the idea, is that you should have that continuum of fans. Um, it makes me actually think of the Simon Kinnick talk, which is about finding your why, and he talks
Hmm.
about I forget what the name of the model is, but or it's like the diffusion of innovation, and it's you see like uh, over percentages of early adopters,
Hmm.
or the early innovators, early adopters, late adopters, and so that like there's these percentages of where people will fall in, and that's kind of, sort of, I guess, part of that process of knowing, it's like, hey, I put this out and I expect only like the true fans, to dig
Right.
it, like
Yeah.
that's the, I think about it in music, like that's the unreleased tracks, the B-sides, like the demos that like the average, they're not going to play those on the radio, like,
Right.
and they probably won't even play them live, but like, for the true fan, like they geek out on the process, and so like we want to hear the mess ups and like the studio banter, and so I think to have a brand, to have a title, to have a following that, you have all these different avenues of access points is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, I'm just thinking, if there's someone listening who is not a social media person, and just the thought of having to create a brand online is giving you ulcers, like, don't worry. Maybe your, avatar, the person you're speaking to, isn't even online. So it's okay. It's okay. It's totally fine.
Yeah, well, and I can speak to that. I mean, hence the one blog post.
Yes.
So like, yeah, I mean, I totally struggle with that. And this is another, another topic we've talked about, for another time, this whole thing of like working on your business versus working in, and I think it's a struggle sometimes. These types of conversations we're having are a little bit in between, but I'd say they're more about working on your business as you're really trying to think like, how do you represent yourself? How do you market yourself? And these types of conversations often give, me more anxiety because I feel like, it's one more barrier to like, that is keeping me from, like getting in there and doing the work that's fulfilling. But that's where I think, for me anyway, being able to see it as another way to just sort of express myself, is where it can be a little bit more fun, and that's why I've always had a little bit of a cringe response to those that just specifically title or brand their thing just completely after their name. Like it literally just is George's CrossFit. And
I was like, you mean like AE Wellness?
Yeah,
what are you saying, Jared?
right. No, I mean, and it's like, and I think there's a lot of good, there's a lot of good reason to do something like that. It's very specific. It's very direct. But like for me, I always feel like, like I'm more interested in trying to create something bigger than yourself, and kind of like, I want to be Batman, not Bruce Wayne. It's like, and I think that's fun, and it's, it's sort of, it's inviting, for me anyway, and at least that's how I've tried to kind of come to all this stuff and ease some of the anxiety, is like, I'm interested in trying to create that, more of a brand or a mask, if you will, that is more symbolic than, like I don't want to be Jared Cohen.
And
Only
it's different
circles.
for everybody, because
Yeah.
I just want to be me. I don't ever want, I mean, who knows, but like, I'd love to create something bigger than me, but I don't ever see myself, with perhaps like a teacher training program or something like that. I just want to deliver content the way I want to deliver it, and whatever I'm currently interested in at the time,
Yeah.
And so again, doing the homework to be clear about your why of why you're doing stuff will make all of this other detail more clear. And it also, I mean, it just really helps too to make the decision like, oh, well, should I be on this, social media channel or this? Well, no, it doesn't matter. That's not where my people are. I can let that one go.
Yeah.
Being honest with yourself about, what you can actually do and what you want to do. there's no point in torturing yourself to, fit some mold that you've decided, well, so and so is doing this, I should be doing this too. It's like, if you have no interest, don't waste your time.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, and it also it speaks to trying um, to limit the ego game. It's like, don't get caught up. And I think this is hard for all of us. Like, sort of getting caught up in the competition of it. It's like, oh well, look how they're branding themselves, and
Yes.
and this is why I really want to get Ryan Holiday on the show. Particularly for his latest book, Ego is the Enemy, because I think, this ego thing really plays big in the coaching sphere, especially nowadays with social media. Like, it's always in your face. And I have a real hard time with this, like feeling bad about myself sometimes, when I'm seeing, all the different content people are putting out, and I guess the representations of it, right? But I think, to your point, is like being clear about your why, and also, as we said earlier, your why that is time sensitive, in terms of like, what is your why right now? Like, it maybe, it's not, it doesn't make sense for you to create like a methodology that you want to train others in. It's like, so then if you're clear about that, you shouldn't get mad, or shouldn't feel the same frustration about why, like, you're not doing the same thing that Jill Miller is doing, or Kelly Starrett, or Andrea Spina, because like you already decided like that isn't your path, and I think sometimes it becomes difficult when we're seeing a lot of people that seem like they're in similar spaces, but really have very different paths. And therefore, when we're not as clear about our own path, we become that much more susceptible to the ego trickery,
distraction.
Yeah. The self-doubt.
And that happens at every level.
Yeah. Totally.
Even if people aren't talking about it, I know, the comparison, or feeling like an imposter. We all do it, and we all have those times. And, whenever I find myself on social media, just like, oh, well, this person has so many followers and so much engagement. It's like, that's just a waste of time that I could be spending doing something, A, that I want to do, B, is going to make me feel better, and C, that's going to help my tribe and my readers and my followers kick ass every day.
Yeah.
And me getting down on myself about some BS stat online does not help them kick ass. So get back to work.
Yeah, and that's it right there. I mean, that positive reframing, like, it's so important. And it's just like, for me, becoming aware of that trigger sooner, to do that reframing, so I don't get sucked
before you're 20 minutes into the rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm like, oh, and so I get so sucked in that now, like, I've like depleted all my good energy with like energy of frustration and sadness.
We all do it.
We all do it. Yeah. And I, it really, and that's, for me, that's the importance of this tribe, this community, behind the podium, is like, is being able to build some camaraderie around that, those of us in these trenches and experiencing a lot of these struggles, especially as it relates to the social media game, and how much more complicated branding and audience finagling and moderation becomes, within that internet space. I'll mention another, I think, counter to that, which I feel like hits home really well, is this recent podcast I listened to with Ryan Holiday on Michael Gervais' podcast. This is my new favorite podcast, called Finding Mastery. And Michael Gervais is a sports psychologist, and most notably known as of late as the sports psychologist for the Seattle Seahawks, and
Oh.
they're actually having this very similar conversation about social media and Instagram. And Ryan Holiday makes the like totally true and forgotten point that before like 5 years ago, the only people that had followers were cult leaders.
Yeah.
And it's like I feel like that is like such the like bring me back down to earth reminder that I need.
Reality check.
Yeah, like reality check. Without a doubt, it's like, oh my god, yes, that's hilarious and so true. Another one that makes me think of that is Max Schenk, is a coach and owner of the gym Ambition Athletics in Encinitas, and he's recently come up with he's an interesting guy because he has a lot of projects, both as a gym owner and an author, and he just came up with a new program, a seminar I just attended called the 5 Minute Flow, and he makes the point in the seminar that like, hey, look, this isn't like a competitive thing, being a professional flower. Do you know what that actually is? That's a professional flower, like, and it's like, you just like, oh my God, you're like, yeah, like, cause there's a moment where you're in the class. And I think for a lot of people that haven't spent as much time in yoga and then like do a one-off yoga class, you get very caught up in like, the competition of like how well you're doing the poses. And it's just that social psychology, but that reminder that it's like, oh my God, like there's a time and place for competition, but sometimes you need to be reminded of how ridiculous that competition looks or even sounds when you take, flowing too seriously, and now you become just a pro flower. Like to me, that's hilarious and so true.
That's funny. That's funny. There's pro everything. I mean, there's actually a yoga competition. I don't know if you know about this. I can't, like the Yoga Olympics, and it's like a weird mix of bodybuilding and contortion, and you do all these poses, and it's like, is that what I'm really working towards now?
Yeah, there's a book about it called Hellbent, I believe it's called. I bought it and read a little bit of it back in the day, which is like it was kind of like a one of those more like participatory journalist stories where this writer basically put himself in that world of like, yeah, I mean, and for me at the time, I was very much in that headspace of like personal sacrifice, like, wanting to do all these gut-wrenching workouts just, for the glory.
Yeah.
Like, and so to me, it was interesting to sort of, I was a little immediately or at least partially attracted to the story because of the for the sort of aspect of what these people were willing to sacrifice, for this somewhat kind of ambiguous and really health detrimental pursuit of being able to be extremely bendy, to the extent that you do have these contortionistic abilities, and I think as coaches, it's important that we take a step back, and this is where it comes into that whole client-centered thing. It's like, hey, look, what are they looking to get out of this?
Yeah.
What is the best program for them? What is the best goal for them? Right? There's a bunch of different feats. There's a bunch of different PRs you can help someone achieve, and ultimately, what's really important is that achievability that exists along the path. It's like, but not everybody needs to do a 500-pound deadlift. And I think that's another part of this whole like branding thing is, who are you, and what is that message you're giving? Because I think, sometimes back to the, potentially the haters of CrossFit, they are interpreting CrossFit coaches as potentially being those that are pushing people too far, in a direction maybe they don't want to go. And on one end, we should all be open-minded about where what someone's doing and what maybe that title means. But on the other end, we as sort of the owners of these titles need to be more responsible in how we're practicing our thing, so that we're delivering that true message, especially when there's others sharing that. And it's like, I think performance enhancement coach is really awesome, but like, I worry about the other performance enhancement coaches out there that are maybe diluting that message. And on the contrary, I would I think Jill and Yoga Tune Up has done a great job, where I feel very even though people may not, there are a lot of people won't know what Yoga Tune Up is. I take a lot of pride in saying I'm a Yoga Tune Up teacher, because I really believe in the truthfulness of that community and everyone that's gone through that process, of which you can attend Alex's upcoming Yoga Tune-Up indoctrination teacher trainer.
But I think like that's my thing too about titles, is that it automatically puts you into a certain category with a bunch of other people who aren't you. And so it's not like we have to, or maybe we do come up with these crazy unique titles, but then you're like, oh, well, that doesn't really mean anything to other people. And so I just want to go back and just, uncover the why of what you do. And that will make everything else so much more clear and easy. Because also I think that it's a very, I don't know if it's all of North America, but I know it's very American to be defined by what you do. Yeah, that's a great point. And in other places of the world, you get to be a person beyond what your job is and how you make a living. And we are so focused on that here.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Just as like, I think, especially to wrap up, like, kind of taking a greater step back, like, what are the cultural implications of what we're talking about, and how do other parts of the world transcend this whole conversation just based on how they interact, at a base level with one another, and are not as concerned with not necessarily the credentials, but just the essentially what become kind of superficial terms. It's just like, hey, what do you have to offer? Like, let's get started. So
totally. Well, I know. I was just thinking about that. I was like, gosh, does any of this even matter?
Yeah. Well, and that, I think that's a good question to end on. And one of these things I'm excited to bring other guests on the show to ask about this, and get more insight, and maybe as a growing community, like, perhaps we can decide that it doesn't matter that much, and we want to help each other in that pursuit of being able to remove those obstacles, so that we can all be doing better work, and not be too caught up in this fight of trademarking, so to speak.
No, just keep offering really cool stuff to your people, and keep showing up and being awesome for them. And don't worry about the title. Don't worry about the name, the brand. Just be you, and really awesome at that.
I mean, like Ant-Man, come on. It's a little kind of, even the Ant-Man himself is kind of like I didn't come up with it. But after he starts, kicking ass like a little man, everyone's like, I'm in, Ant-Man.
So in. You're funny.
God, we've had a lot of superhero references.
All right, well, we've made it to the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening and hanging out with us. And we would so very much appreciate it if you could take a minute or two to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes.
Yeah, just and maybe like really simplify the review. Just write like one word.
Ant-Man.
Yeah, or Ant-Man. Yeah, one word of something that you felt after this episode.
Yeah. And also if you have, coworkers or other coaches that you're working with and you guys are struggling with what to call yourselves or what to do, share this podcast. I think the more people that we in our profession or whatever that is that we can say, hey, I don't really have it figured out, the more authentic and real we can all be.
Yeah, definitely. I much prefer starting from this place as opposed to putting on a facade and then taking more time to kind of get to a more authentic starting point to have these conversations. So the more we can jump in and be a little bit more vulnerable and just all open about that, the more I want to hang out.
Yeah. All right. Until next time.
Until next time.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. If you have enjoyed what you listened to, head over to iTunes and leave us a review. More information on each episode and the podcast in general can be found at behindthepodiumpodcast.com. We'll catch you next time.